Hard Target delivered a relentless hero and villains we'll never forget. But the real war happened off-screen. Addiction, broken marriages, crushing illnesses, sudden disappearances, and unbelievable comebacks. And 3 decades later, their 2025 realities are far more shocking than anything in the film. Let's find out and honor what they left behind. Jean-Claude Van Damme as Chance Boudreaux. Jean-Claude Van Damme took on the role of Chance Boudreaux, the stoic drifter whose controlled violence powered Hard Target, 1993, when he was 33 years old. His character became the soul of the film, a wounded hero shaped by silence and survival. What audiences saw on screen reflected a man who was already fighting battles far more dangerous than any stunt. Born October 18, 1960, in Brussels, he carried into his fame a storm of ambition and instability that began long before Hollywood ever knew his name. His rapid rise in films like Bloodsport and Universal Soldier collided with a private life collapsing under addiction, spending up to $10,000 a week on cocaine while his moods swung uncontrollably from euphoria to despair. 5 marriages, 4 women, endless breakups, reconciliations, and betrayals left him emotionally fractured, and by the late 1990s his bipolar disorder pushed him so close to the edge that he publicly admitted he had considered ending his life. Yet the same torment fueled some of his most vulnerable performances. In Time Cop, 1994, he carried anguish behind every punch, and years later, JCVD, 2008, exposed the shattered man behind the myth, earning him the first true critical acclaim of his career. The pain was real. The affairs, the guilt, the rehab failures, the isolation of fame. But beneath all of it, there was a fighter who refused to stay down. Now, Van Damme is 65 years old, still filming action roles with a body marked by decades of combat, on screen and within himself. Medication has stabilized his bipolar disorder, but the emotional debris of his past remains, shaping the quiet way he speaks about peace, compassion, and redemption. With an estimated net worth of $30 million, he works not for necessity, but for purpose, carrying forward the fragile truth that even icons break. Wilford Brimley as Uncle Duvey. Wilford Brimley embodied Uncle Duvey, the warm but steel-spined Cajun mentor in Hard Target, 1993, at the age of 59. His character served as the emotional anchor of the story, guiding Chance Boudreaux with both mischief and hard-earned wisdom. But behind that smile, he carried the weight of real-life battles. Born September 27, 1934 in Salt Lake City, he built a career not on glamour, but on survival. His marriage to Lynn Bagley lasted nearly half a century, a rare stability that kept him steady through the emotional storms behind films like The Natural and The Thing. When she died in 2000, the loss hollowed him, even as diabetes continued tightening its grip. Later, he pushed through scenes on Cocoon and Tender Mercies to hide pain. His second marriage brought companionship, yet the man who once rode horses and worked as a blacksmith now struggled to walk without assistance. Kidney failure drained him slowly. Dialysis became routine, and infections often sent him back to hospital beds he dreaded. Behind the public humor of his Liberty Medical ads, he wrestled with fear and exhaustion. Sadly, Brimley died on August 1, 2020, in St. George, Utah, at age 85 after 2 harsh months of kidney complications. His funeral was quiet, just as he always preferred, a small circle of family standing over a man who had carried their world for decades. His net worth, estimated around $8 million, reflected a lifetime of constant work rather than comfort. Lance Henriksen as Emile Fouchon. At 53 years old, Lance Henriksen portrayed Emile Fouchon, the cultured, predatory mastermind who hunted humans with chilling elegance in Hard Target, 1993. His character served as the film's dark engine, driving every moment of danger with quiet calculation. It was a performance sharpened by scars in real life he rarely spoke about. Born May 5, 1940, in New York City, he carried into adulthood the emotional fractures of marriages that fell apart under the weight of constant work. His performances in Aliens, Millennium, and Near Dark were not just acting. They were vessels for everything he could not articulate in real life: regret, fear, and the exhaustion that comes from always rebuilding. After his second marriage ended despite the joy of raising 2 daughters, he found himself returning to empty rooms, the silence echoing louder than applause ever could. That loneliness followed him into his health struggles, especially as prostate cancer and heart problems forced him to confront a body that no longer kept pace with his relentless drive. To survive, he turned to creativity in the only form that soothed him: art. His pottery studio became a refuge. Between roles in independent films and voice work for Mass Effect and Call of Duty, he admitted that staying busy was the only way he avoided slipping into the same darkness that once defined him his youth. Every bowl he crafted carried a trace of the life he was still trying to understand. In 2025, Henriksen is 85 years old, moving slower, but still refusing to surrender the fire that kept him alive for decades. He spends his days in quiet studios and small film sets, choosing projects that speak to the man he has become: weathered, contemplative, but unbroken. With a net worth of around $5 million, he lives modestly, finding peace in real life. Arnold Vosloo as Pick Van Cleef. Arnold Vosloo brought Pick Van Cleef to life, the elegant but merciless hunter whose cold precision defined Hard Target, 1993, when he was 31 years old. His presence sharpened every scene, a villain whose silence often said more than dialogue ever could. It was a character shaped by discipline, rage, and history from his own experiences in real life. Born June 16, 1962, in Pretoria to a family of theater actors, Vosloo grew up amid apartheid's tension, where identity and survival were complicated from childhood. His early-stage victories in South Africa masked private fractures: 2 marriages that collapsed under career pressure, long stretches of displacement after emigrating, and years navigating the emotional fallout of leaving one country while never fully belonging to another. Even as he transitioned to American films like Darkman 2 and The Mummy, 1999, he carried a quiet heaviness. His breakout as Imhotep in the Mummy franchise made him iconic, but fame came with exhaustion, endless travel, typecasting as the foreign villain, and the emotional weight of representing a face audiences feared rather than understood. On television, roles in 24 and Bosch showed his range, yet each success arrived during private turmoil: marriage strain, relocations, the unspoken loneliness of an actor forever in motion. When Sylvia Ahi filed for divorce in 2025, it revived old wounds he thought he had already buried. Now, at 63 years old, Vosloo divides his time between Los Angeles and South Africa, leaning on theater work that reconnects him to his beginnings. He avoids blockbuster pressures now, preferring roles that explore grief, identity, and quiet brutality. With a net worth of roughly $2 million, he continues acting not for profit, but for grounding, because performance, more than anything, is the one place where he still feels steady. Robert Apisa as Mr. Lopaka. At 48 years old, Robert "Bob" Apisa embodied Mr. Lopaka, the imposing, quietly loyal figure who lent muscle and menace to Hard Target, 1993. His presence gave the film a grounded physicality. Behind that stillness was a man who had reinvented himself more than once just to stay standing. Born on December 10, 1945. In American Samoa, Apisa grew up in a world where poverty shaped every decision, pushing him toward sports as both refuge and hope. His talent carried him to Michigan State, but the dream fractured when NFL injuries ended his future before it began. With a young family and no clear direction, he carried the weight of failure quietly, until stunt work in Hollywood offered him a chance to reclaim both purpose and identity. His marriage held steady through the upheaval, even as he juggled financial uncertainty and the physical toll of taking hits meant for stars who would never know his name. Roles in The Nutty Professor, 1996, and Volcano, 1997, brought brief recognition, but they also came with a harsher truth. Every fall, every burn, and every collision reminded him of the football career he lost and the pain he never entirely escaped. Yet Apisa kept working to provide for his 3 children. By 2025, at 80, Robert Apisa lives quietly in Los Angeles, moving slower now but still carrying the dignity of a man who fought hard for every chapter of his life. He mentors young stunt performers when he can, offering the guidance he once had to seek alone. With an estimated net worth of $1.5 million, he remains proof that some legacies are built not from applause, but from endurance. Yancy Butler as Natasha Binder. Yancy Butler embodied Natasha Binder, the determined daughter clawing through danger in Hard Target, 1993, when she was just 23 years old. Her performance grounded the film with a rare vulnerability, the kind that made every glance feel like a plea for truth. What viewers never saw was how much of her own turbulence poured into that role. Born Yancy Victoria Butler on July 2, 1970, in Manhattan's Greenwich Village, she grew up inside a broken artistic household where music, theater, and emotional instability collided daily. Her parents' divorce carved an early wound, one that followed her into her 20s when alcohol became both an escape and a trap. Even as she delivered strong turns in Drop Zone, 1994, and the cult phenomenon Witchblade, the pressure of rising fame clashed with an inner restlessness. Her success in Witchblade brought awards and acclaim, but off-camera she was unraveling. DUIs, court-mandated rehab, relapses, and the humiliation of headlines that reduced her to a mugshot. She tried building a marriage that might anchor her, but it collapsed under addiction's weight, leaving her alone at a moment when she needed stability most. Each attempt at recovery was followed by another fall, leaving deep emotional bruises long before it damaged her career. Now, at 55, Yancy lives quietly in Winnetka, Los Angeles, choosing solitude over spotlight as she continues long-term treatment to maintain sobriety. She accepts only selective voice work now, choosing gentler creative spaces that don't ignite old patterns. With an estimated net worth of $1 million, she moves through life carefully. Lenor Banks as Marie. Lenor Banks brought to life Marie, the tender, resilient Southern woman whose quiet strength softened the violence in Hard Target, 1993, at the age of 62. Her character served as the emotional shelter of the story, grounding the chaos with a motherly steadiness that felt lived in. What she offered on screen was a reflection of decades of battles she had already survived. Born December 31, 1931 in New Orleans, she carried within her the weight of a heritage shaped by poverty, discrimination, and the determination to rise anyway. Her early marriage to a jazz musician brought 3 children, but also years of addiction, instability, and the painful decision to walk away in 1970, leaving her to raise her family alone while juggling work as a local performer and nurse. That resilience shaped every role she later touched, especially her breakout in Passion Fish, 1992, earning her an Oscar nomination and opened doors she once believed were permanently closed. But Hollywood, arriving late in her life, carried its own kind of cruelty. Casting directors often dismissed her because of her age and skin tone, and the sting of those rejections pushed her into bouts of depression that grew heavier as arthritis and high blood pressure began to slow her body. Yet she kept moving, pouring her faith and experience into films like The Apostle, 1997. Sadly, Lenor Banks died on June 17, 2020, at age 88 in Baton Rouge after complications from heart surgery, an ending as sudden as it was devastating for those who knew how brightly she still hoped to work. Her funeral in Louisiana carried the warmth of the city that shaped her. With an estimated net worth of about $2 million, her legacy rests not in wealth, but in the stories she helped tell and the final message she left behind. Tell the truth through your art. Sven-Ole Thorsen as Stefan. Sven-Ole Thorsen embodied Stefan, the towering, brutal enforcer who unleashed some of Hard Target, 1993's most physical moments, when he was 49 years old. His character functioned as Fouchon's silent hammer, a wall of muscle built to intimidate and destroy. The force he showed on screen was forged from a lifetime of surviving pain. Born September 24, 1944, in Copenhagen, he carried from his youth a hunger to outrun poverty and failure, driving him into wrestling, karate, and eventually strongman competitions that left his knees and spine permanently damaged. His first marriage to Anika produced 2 children, but crumbled in 1991 under the strain of his constant training, injuries, and the pressure of a career that had no room for rest. When he finally broke into Hollywood with films like Predator, 1987, and later Gladiator, 2000, the chronic pain never let him forget what it had cost. His second marriage to Birgitta Sunding brought stability, yet even love struggled against the distance created by years spent filming abroad and rebuilding a career from stunt work to acting. As age advanced, the old strongman wounds returned with a vengeance: arthritis, spinal compression, and a constant ache that made even sitting for long interviews difficult. Still, the man who had once stood beside Schwarzenegger refused to slow down. In 2025, Thorsen is 81 years old, living quietly in Denmark with his wife while completing new chapters of his life story. He spends his days mentoring, training lightly, and watching young actors. With a net worth of roughly $3 million, he carries less wealth than many of his peers, but far more resilience, etched into every scar his career left behind. Marco St. John as Dr. Morton at 54 years old. Marco St. John inhabited Dr. Morton, the opportunistic, morally decayed surgeon patching up hunters for profit in Hard Target, 1993. His character served as the film's unsettling reminder that corruption thrives not only at gunpoint, but also behind a doctor's smile. But everything he brought to the screen came from a lifetime of wrestling with his own shadows. Born May 7, 1939, in New Orleans, he carried the ambition of a Fordham-trained stage actor who expected Broadway to embrace him, only to be met with rejection that pushed him into drinking through much of his 30s. His early years were a cycle of auditions lost and roles barely earned, even as he fought to stay steady after the traumatic death of his first wife, Barbara, which left him raising their son alone while trying to keep his career alive. Those wounds deepened his later work, especially in Thelma and Louise, 1991, and Friday the 13th, A New Beginning, 1985. St. John eventually remarried, finding stability with Lorraine, yet that peace was often shaken by the turmoil of a son struggling with addiction, a burden he carried into every rehearsal and every set. Even as the industry shifted toward younger faces, he refused to retreat, instead reshaping his career through regional theater and roles in True Detective, 2014. Behind each performance was a man who understood heartbreak not as an obstacle, but as a tool. In 2025, Marco St. John is 86 years old, still performing across the American South with the quiet persistence of someone who never stopped believing in the craft. He continues to work despite age and fading energy, holding on to the stage as if it were the last steady place in his life. With an estimated net worth of about $1 million, he lives modestly. Willie C. Carpenter as Elijah Roper. Willie C. Carpenter portrayed Elijah Roper, the sharp-witted, quietly wise ally in Hard Target, 1993, when he was 55 years old. His character brought humor and dignity to the violence around him, grounding the story with humanity. That steadiness reflected a man who had spent his entire life fighting to be seen. Born in 1938 in Detroit, he rose from neighborhoods defined by poverty and racial barriers, carrying into adulthood a determination that shaped roles in Reasonable Doubts and later Men in Black, 1997. His marriage anchored him through the hardest years, but when his wife died unexpectedly, the grief pulled him into a depression. Even then, he kept working. As the industry evolved, Carpenter shifted toward voice acting, finding solace in work that demanded discipline but spared him the emotional exposure of on-camera roles. Each character he portrayed held a trace of that vulnerability, and audiences felt it without knowing why. In 2025, Carpenter is 87 years old, still lending his voice to new projects, a quiet persistence that mirrors the resilience of his early life. He lives simply, choosing routine over applause and carrying forward the memories of those he lost. With an estimated net worth of about $2 million, he remains working not for wealth, but because storytelling is the one place where he still feels whole. Kasi Lemmons as Det. Marie Mitchell. Kasi Lemmons portrayed Det. Marie Mitchell, the sharp, principled officer cutting through New Orleans corruption in Hard Target, 1993, when she was 34 years old. Her presence added moral weight to the film, grounding its chaos with a calm, investigative force. Beneath that controlled performance was a woman who had already fought through her own storms. Born Karen Diane Lemmons on February 24, 1959, in St. Louis, she grew up navigating the emotional fractures left by her parents' divorce and the constant relocations that followed. She built her identity slowly, through acting classes, small television roles, and the relentless discipline that kept her afloat in an industry quick to discard women of color. By the time she appeared in The Silence of the Lambs and Candyman, she had learned how to turn old wounds into creative instinct. Her marriage to Vondie Curtis Hall in 1995 became the stability she had never known, a partnership that steadied her through the weight of becoming a filmmaker. While directing Eve's Bayou, 1997, and Harriet, 2019, she carried both pride and pressure, the burden of representation, the exhaustion of being one of Hollywood's few black female directors, and the fear of failing in a space that rarely forgives women who dare to lead. Yet she pushed through every doubt, reshaping her identity from actress to auteur with a quiet determination that felt almost defiant. Today, at 66, Kasi Lemmons continues to direct, teach, and mentor young filmmakers from her home in New York, moving with the calm confidence of someone who has survived the long corridors of Hollywood judgment. She works deliberately now, choosing projects that speak to legacy rather than visibility. With a net worth of approximately $10 million, she remains a steady force. Chuck Pfarrer as Douglas Binder. At 36 years old, Chuck Pfarrer stepped into the role of Douglas Binder, the fractured, haunted brother whose disappearance sparks the film's central mystery in Hard Target, 1993. He carried into that performance the weight of a man who had seen real violence, not invented it, and his screenplay gave the story its pulse of quiet tragedy. But behind the role, he got overcome many differences in real life. Born Charles Patrick Pfarrer III in Boston, he grew up far from Hollywood, drawn instead to the unforgiving discipline of military life. Years later, the Beirut barracks bombing in 1983 left him with injuries that were not just physical, wounds that no battlefield medic could close. PTSD shadowed him long after he returned home, tightening its grip during sleepless nights, strained relationships, and an eventual divorce that marked the quiet collapse of a man who had once led others into danger with certainty. As a writer, he poured those fractures into stories. Navy SEALs, 1990, The Jackal, 1997, films shaped by the precision of someone who didn't have to imagine fear because he had already memorized its voice. But success came at a cost. Reliving trauma on the page, the long hours of isolation, and a lingering sense that survival itself was a kind of guilt. Even surviving cancer later in life became another reminder that his body had been fighting for decades, whether on foreign soil or inside hospital walls. In 2025, at 68, Pfarrer lives quietly as an author, choosing the solitude of writing over Hollywood's noise. He carries himself like a man who has earned his silence, still battling old memories while shaping them into stories that help him make sense of what he endured. With a net worth of roughly $5 million, he moves forward carefully. Jules Sylvester as Peterson. Jules Sylvester took on the role of Peterson, the calm, calculating hunter stalking prey through New Orleans in Hard Target, 1993, when he was 43 years old. His scenes carried the authenticity of a man who understood danger not as spectacle but as routine. Beneath every movement was the steadiness of someone who had lived closer to wild animals than to other people. Born Julian Richard Sylvester on November 13, 1950, in Devon, and raised in the rugged landscapes of Kenya, he learned early that survival depended on instinct more than comfort. By 16, he was catching snakes, and before long he was working as a lion keeper at Edinburgh Zoo, carrying with him the weight of a youth spent between beauty and brutality. His years of service in the Rhodesian Bush War left scars he rarely spoke of. Marriage anchored him in ways the wild never could. With Sue Sylvester by his side since 1987, he built a life around animals, risk, and the strange peace that danger sometimes brings. His work as an animal handler shaped some of Hollywood's most iconic films: Turner and Hooch, 1989, Jurassic Park, 1993, Snakes on a Plane. Yet each job brought new tension, new bites avoided, new moments when one mistake could have rewritten his entire story. Even as fame followed him onto late-night shows and television documentaries, he carried the quiet exhaustion of a man who lived his life one heartbeat away from disaster. In 2025, at 75, Sylvester manages wildlife operations between England and California. He spends more time with his 2 children, more time training handlers. With an estimated net worth of $2 million, he lives simply, aware that the real wealth he keeps is the strange, dangerous life he survived long enough to tell. Now that you've seen the hidden battles behind Hard Target's cast, which story shocked you the most? And whose journey did you never expect to end this way? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold Hollywood truths. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. Goodbye.